Welcome to this episode of Disease Du Jour on the Equine Microbiome, brought to you by Merck Animal Health. I'm your host, Kim Brown, publisher of Equine Management. Our guest for this episode is Marcio Costa, DVM PhD, an assistant professor in the Department of Veterinary Biomedical Sciences at the University of Montreal. Dr. Costa earned his degree in veterinary medicine in Brazil and moved to Canada to complete his residency in large animal internal medicine at the University of Guelph. He completed his PhD in 2014 using next-generation sequencing to investigate factors affecting the intestinal microbiome of horses. His research is focused on microbiome manipulation to improve the health of domestic animals. Thank you, Dr. Costa, for joining us today on Disease Du Jour to talk about the equine microbiome.
Hi, Kim. It's my pleasure to be here with you today.
Well, I'm going to jump right in and say, what is the microbiome and why is it important to horse health?
Okay, so the microbiome is pretty much the collection of all the microorganisms that we have in and on us. So they inhabit our body and constantly interacting with us. So that means all the bacteria, viruses, fungi, archaea, and pretty much small parasites that live in and on us. And normally we refer to bacteria as a synonym of microbiota. So why they are important to horses, not only for horses, but to all of us. Like I said, we are constantly interacting, and we actually evolved in nature along with those organisms. So we were selected to carry those bacteria and other microorganisms to help us in many, many different ways, from better digesting the food we eat, to upregulating or to regulating our immune system. And also, we normally, when we talk about bacteria, we think about bad bacteria, but in reality, the vast majority of them, they are good. We call them commensal bacteria, meaning that they live with us, causing no harm. Eventually, they will become pathogens, but normally they cause no harm.
So what do equine veterinarians need to know about the equine microbiome to help horses stay healthy or regain health?
Yes. So normally in veterinary medicine, we are always many steps behind the knowledge that we have from human medicine. So before answering that question, I have to say that we are just at the beginning of a long journey in which we are just starting to learn stuff. And so far, we don't know much. Like I said, we are just starting to discover things in horses. The vast majority of studies that were performed so far, they are descriptive, meaning that we have two groups of horses and we're gonna see the differences in the bacteria. Okay, for example, we had a group of horses with diarrhea and a group of healthy horses, and we go there and we see what are the differences, meaning that it's difficult to imply a cause-consequence relationship. We cannot say this bacteria is causing diarrhea. We can only say that we observed a difference in animals that have diarrhea, which can be caused by many, many different things, okay? So having said that, so far we know that the intestinal bacteria of horses, they are very important. We already knew that because horses, they are herbivores that were selected in nature to eat basically grass, right? And they rely on these bacteria to help them digest this food. We in horses, we don't have the enzymes that we need to break those plant carbohydrates. So the bacteria will break them for them and produce substances that we call volatile fatty acids that can now be used by the horse as an energy source. Okay, so they are extremely important to horses, and what we are doing now with the research is finding which factors can change this microbiota and what are the consequences. Are they positive or negative to the health of those animals? Okay, so far we know that, for example, diet, it's a major factor driving the composition of this microbiome, as we call. If you add carbohydrates or if you change them from the pasture to a hay-based diet, we're going to induce changes in the composition of this bacteria. Okay. Other factors like stress, for example, shipping horses in a long distance, this can alter their bacteria, or if they are at a high intensity level of exercise, this can also change their microbiome. And I was talking also about other physiological states. For example, pregnancy has been shown to cause some predictable changes. And of course, any type of treatments we give, the most evident is the use of antibiotics. When you give antibiotics to foals or to adult horses, we have shown that this will induce severe and drastic changes in the microbiota, just like we also have in humans and lab animals.
And how in your research and in your studies, do you think that we can use this to help horses either stay healthy or regain health?
Well, that's the question we always want to answer is the first thing is, what are the good, what are the bad bacteria, right? So this is what we are doing right now, gaining a lot of knowledge about what changes the microbiota, how does it change, and if that's good or bad. Okay, the next step in the research is to do microbiota manipulation, meaning that we're gonna try to change this the composition of those bacteria to improve animal health. Okay, there are different ways we can do that. So the most popular ways are probiotics, which are live bacteria that we give by mouth, and this should bring benefits to the horse, or either treating disease or avoiding them to get sick. It's a lot of controversies about the use of probiotics in horses, basically because for every study that shows a good impact of probiotics, there is another one that shows no difference. So I'm not against. All I always say is that we need stronger evidence to see how these bacteria work in the gut. Okay. And the other problem with probiotics is most of them are transient. Okay, meaning that you give to the horse, you're gonna find that those bacteria in the feces, but if you stop giving, you stop finding. So you have to carry on treating the horse to carry that beneficial impact of this supplement on the gut. Okay, and also because it's very difficult to this bacteria to in fact colonize the gut, because there are so many bacteria that are already there that it's just difficult to them to attach to the mucosa and multiplicate and become stay living there. Okay, and just because it's a very competitive environment, so it's easier to manipulate the microbiota of sick animals that have an imbalance. We call that a dysbiosis, but also of young animals like foals that don't have yet a well-established microbiota. So it's easier to manipulate at that window of age, okay? The other way to do that is the use of prebiotics that are non-digestible compounds that you give to the horse. The horse will not digest that, but the bacteria will. Okay, meaning that you can benefit the bacteria that will eat that prebiotic so they can proliferate and become dominant in that environment. Okay, this is a very strong way to manipulate the microbiota, and but yeah, again, we don't have a lot of, we are just starting to see some well-designed studies published in the literature, okay? And finally, we also have the what they call fecal microbiota transplantation or transformation, in which you transfer the whole ecosystem, the fecal matter, from a healthy donor into a patient. This became very popular in humans with Clostridium difficile infection, in which this treatment is very efficient in resolving diarrhea. You basically treat them, and almost 90% of patients receiving this transplantation get better within 2 days. They resolve the diarrhea. We have done that in horses for decades. We treated them with fecal transplant or cecal content transformation, especially if they have diarrhea. I'm not aware of any well-controlled studies using a control group not receiving the treatment and a group of sick horses receiving the FMT, we call it for short, fecal microbiota transplantation. So at this point, I normally still recommend the treatment, but there is no. It's important to state and to highlight that there is not good evidence, scientific evidences that the procedure works in horses. In humans, they do that by enema. We cannot do that in horses because they have a very long small colon. So we need to give it by mouth. And the problem is that a lot of bacteria will die from the moment we start to expose them to the oxygen when we are preparing the FMT. By the moment they reach the stomach with the low pH, and then, in my opinion, this is what I think also, when they reach the cecum, they're going to stay there in this fermentation chamber for a long time before they can actually reach the large colon, where you have many problems, including colitis and colic. So the research we are doing right now is to try to focus on improving the fecal microbiota transplantation in horses, because it's such a powerful tool that works really well in humans and in dogs, for example, and you can induce very evident changes in lab animals, but we don't know if this is the same in horses. I'm publishing some evidence that we treated horses with colitis with a standard treatment that is prescribed right now for horses, the protocol that has been suggested, and it had no changes in the microbiota, okay? So what we want to do is to improve that. One way we are trying to do is to concentrate the bacteria from the FMT and give it to patients. We don't know yet if it's going to work, but this is the way we are trying to go.
So I know a lot of veterinarians face horses that have either very long, prolonged diarrhea. A lot of horses will get on antibiotics. We know that disrupts the microbiome in the horse. I know feed companies are investigating the microbiome to try and improve feed and nutrition from the feedstuffs that they're doing. So where do you think research should be going on this, and what are you working on?
Well, I think we are starting to get, enough knowledge that we can actually start to design products that are targeting some bacteria that are associated with gut health. For example, we know that butyrate producers, which are bacteria that will produce a type of volatile fatty acid called butyrate, that it's very beneficial to the cells of the intestinal mucosa. They are used by the cells. Okay, in humans, though the high prevalence of those bacteria are associated with lower incidences of rectal cancer, for example. So, and in horses, this fatty acid is also very important. So there are some information right now, and we see a lot of new products, especially for dogs, that there are some published research showing beneficial changes in their fecal microbiota when you feed them with those special diets. And I know there are those products for designed for horses too. I'm just not aware if those studies are published yet. So I think we are starting to see a good improve, of the way that we prevent. So in my opinion, this would be a great way to prevent what we call dysbiosis. We benefit those commensal bacteria, and we avoid those animals having dysbiosis. But this is not the most efficient way to, for example, treat an animal that already has a dysbiosis, for example, with diarrhea or with colic, or an animal going into surgery. We know that they're going to have severe alterations in their gut microbiome. So we need to treat that just to help them to recover faster. Okay. So I think those products are great, but like I said, there is still not a good treatment to correct that faster. And that's why we need to do more research on this field of treating and being more efficient in changing the microbiota of horses. The question I also have for my research program, it's about what's the normal microbiota that horses should have. For all the animals, including humans, when we go to nature, compared to domesticated species, you're gonna see that there are animals in nature, they have into the wild, they have much more diversity in their microbiome, meaning that they carry more species, more types of species. Okay, a lot of people call that the hygiene hypothesis, saying that we have become very clean, that we are not exposed a lot to many different types of bacteria, and they can actually show that in the laboratory to induce diseases like asthma or allergies in general in mice models that are colonized with a low diversity microbiota. And the question I have, or some research has shown that when you compare wild horses with domesticated animals, you also see that they have a higher diversity in their gut, meaning that they have more different species of bacteria. So the question I have is, do we need to improve that in the horses, that we breed in the barn, we keep them in a very close environment? Should them be getting exposed to more bacteria? So this is one question also we want to answer.
Today's Disease Du Jour podcast is brought to you by Merck Animal Health, the makers of prestige vaccines, Banamine, Panacur, Regimate, Protozil, and other trusted equine health solutions. Merck Animal Health works for you and for horses. Learn more about Merck Animal Health's comprehensive portfolio of products, as well as their ongoing investment in our industry, profession, and community at merckanimalhealthusa.com. So when veterinarians, the thing is, every place you go, every lecture, there's some question about the microbiome and how it affects the animal, whether it's healthy or sick. So how do veterinarians today know how to apply some of this, or is it quite ready for application by veterinarians in the field?
Not quite ready yet, okay, because the methods we use to characterize the microbiota, we call DNA sequencing, okay? Those technologies have evolved a lot in the last decades. It has become cheaper and faster to use them, but we are not at the level to use that in the field, okay? So if you want to know the horse is dysbiotic, you really need to get a fecal sample, you need to extract the DNA, you need to send them to the sequencing facility, and then you need to do bioinformatic analysis, and then you need to look at the results and compare to the current knowledge we have to actually say, yes, there is a dysbiosis, which many times will be useless in a sense that if the horse is sick, you know it will have dysbiosis, okay? Right now, we have 3 or 4 studies that have investigated the changes occurring in horses with diarrhea. So we kind of are starting to know what to expect in horses with diarrhea, in horses with colic, in horses that had a grain overload. So ideally, you could pinpoint which those changes are so you can correct that precisely. That's what we call personalized medicine or precision medicine, if you like. This is very fashionable right now in humans, and the microbiome composition is being incorporated into that concept in a way that each person has a different microbiota. And this can be important to metabolize drugs, for example, and one treatment might not be as efficient to you as it is for me. So it's we are not quite there yet to work in veterinary medicine. But what I'm also working on is to, for example, in calves, we are creating some diagnostic tools that will allow us to quickly compare the differences between farms. We are not at the individual level yet, but we can know this farm, they have used a lot of antibiotics, so they are depleted on this bacteria. So we probably can do a target therapy, developing a probiotic that should be given to this farm, but not to that farm. There is a group from Texas. They created what they call a dysbiosis index that is being used for dogs. So it's basically a quick test that will tell us which of the major important bacteria that are depleted in that patient. Okay, this is done by we call a qPCR. You can do it like a real time, just within a few hours. You can know the answer about which bacteria are decreased, but this is limited to the bacteria we include in the test. Okay, we cannot include more than 10 bacteria, for example, but in real life, that ecosystem is comprised by many hundreds of bacteria. So it's not very broad, but it can give you an idea about which of the good bacteria that should be there that is not there. So we don't have that for horses yet. I spoke with them and they were developing an index like that for horses too, that hopefully shortly can be used by veterinarians in the field, at least to have an idea if there is something, you know, major going on with the most important bacteria that should be there and are not.
Well, this actually sounds like an exciting time to be in your field of research, Dr. Costa. I mean,
yes, I say I'm very lucky. I was in the right time at the right moment to start working in this field. And it's also, I always say that it's very easy to speak about this topic because I can always say we don't know that yet. That's the most common answer I normally give to people.
But there's been so many positive things done in humans and even to a limited extent in other species of animals that the excitement of this kind of study and research is, I mean, like I said, every place you go, somebody says, now let's consider the microbiome of the animal.
Yes, absolutely. I was just participating in a human conference. It was virtual, so now it's easier to go to conferences, right? And they were, but they always keep the, you know, saying that we even in humans they say we are just at the beginning of the journey. We are starting to understand. We are starting to try to manipulate, but this is such a complex ecosystem that is still very difficult to say, which brings us also a lot of frustration because when we started with that, everybody thought that by now we would be able, you know, to be very efficient in treating and manipulating and treating, for example, obesity in humans, but it's not that easy. You know, conceptually, it is easy to do it. Let's change, let's bring the good guys and let's make it healthier, but it's not so simple. So there is a lot of companies, you know, that try to manipulate and to do trials with some strains of probiotics, but it's difficult to establish colonization. It's difficult to get to commercialize those products. So it's a long way before we can actually start seeing the manipulation of the microbiome to save lives and to improve health.
But I guess from what I'm hearing from what you're saying is that while we have a lot to learn about this, it probably is worthwhile for veterinarians in the field to try maybe the FMT if they have a chronic diarrhea, a colic, a horse that's come out of surgery, those types of things.
Yes, I normally I like to do those therapies, you know, but I keep looking into the literature. There is just one paper from Tufts just published right now, University of Tufts, in which they were testing the procedure in geriatric patients with diarrhea, but you know, pretty much half of the patients got better and corrected the dysbiosis, and the other didn't. So there is not enough evidence. Like in humans, they have meta-analysis of the literature in which they can say it works really well. You know, in those studies in horses, we normally use 5 horses, 6 horses.
Yeah.
So it's not enough, you know. Like I said, I have preliminary data showing it doesn't change much. Okay, I had also a small pilot study using 3 control horses. We induce dysbiosis by treating them with antibiotics. And then you see a big shift on the microbiota. And then you try to treat them with FMT, and the control group and the treatment group, they return to the normal state together. So it's a bit frustrating. And this is unpublished data. I'm giving you this in firsthand, but I was a bit frustrated when I saw the results. I would expect them to return much better. You see some good beneficial impact in some populations of bacteria, but it's not the whole ecosystem that returns. It's not like in humans that you treat a patient and the microbiota of the patient becomes very similar to the donor. Okay, some studies show that. So why is this? Is this because the donor I'm using is not good enough? Is this because the patient, the bacteria is not reaching the large colon or the feces? Maybe there is a beneficial impact on the fecal microbiota, but we cannot see that, unless we cannulate those horses. We have to make a surgery to insert a cannula there that we can see what's going on more proximally. But we normally use feces as a proxy of the proximal microbiota, which might not be ideal, but that's what we have. Yeah. That's what we have to work with.
Well, is there anything else about the microbiome of the horse that you would like to say to the veterinarians that are listening to this podcast?
Well, I want, I think it's very important for everybody to stay tuned and to be updated. In the literature, there are very nice reviews that are often published telling us at which stage we are now regarding the knowledge. We also have to be very aware of any claims that are normally made. As a reviewer, I get that a lot. People trying to make big statements, but we need to be very scientific based, if I can say that in English, to be aware that sometimes we see things that are not real, because those technologies that we use right now, they have a lot of limitations, especially claiming changes at the species level, okay, which is not good with the technologies we have. We actually can only classify the bacteria at higher levels. For example, we can say it's a Clostridium, but we cannot say to each species of Clostridium those changes were caused. There are so many different species of Clostridium, as you know. Some of them will produce nasty toxins that can kill a horse or a human, but the other are beneficial. In humans, sometimes they use species of Clostridium as a probiotic or to treat dysbiosis. So it's very important to be aware that sometimes what you read is not very precise, but also it's important to stay updated, and try to go to the scientific literature very often to see the new discoveries in the field.
Well, Dr. Costa, thank you very much for joining us today. I have a feeling you and I will be talking again in the future, because this is such an interesting and new field of research for horses that yes. I hope we get together again soon, and you can tell us your new discovery.
If I have some, that would be a pleasure to contribute, and to help with continuing education. It's always a pleasure.
Well, thank you. And we like to thank our audience for listening to Disease Du Jour today. And a big thanks to our 2020 sponsor, Merck Animal Health. Please listen and rate previous and future episodes of Disease Du Jour on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher, or your favorite podcast platform. Follow Equine Management on Facebook or send us an email at kbrown@aimmedia.com. The Daily Vet Life Podcast is a production of the Equine Podcast Network, an entity of the Equine Network.